and welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 56. I'm Charlie Place, and joining me today is an author who has had multiple bestsellers. Her first 3 novels were #1 in the Kindle store. Talking with me today about her latest book, which is called Impossible to Forget, published on the 1st of February, and it was a bestseller straight away. Hello, Imogen Clark.
Hi Charlie.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well indeed.
You started writing later in life. Your first book was published when you were over 50. How was that?
It's really exciting. My first career was as a solicitor, and I did that. And then we had some children, and it got a bit complicated trying to hold down quite a big career and looking after the children. So I stopped being a solicitor and became a stay-at-home mum. And so I did that for a while. And then once all the children had gone to school, I still needed to be there because they come home from school and there's all the holidays and all that kind of stuff. And we hadn't got any childcare set up. But I'd got this great chunk of time during the day. So I started trying to write because I thought it would be fun. And I then did an English degree with the OU, which was also fun. And whilst I was doing that, I continued to write. So that all just took time. And by the time I'd got to the end of that and had worked out how to write a novel, then I was 50. And so then it feels like a whole new second career, really, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, yeah, you've published a good amount of books quite quickly. You write quite quickly. Yeah. Did I hear that you publish what is basically your first draft?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it does get Amazon edit it, obviously, and it goes through a very rigorous editing process with a structural edit and a copy edit and a proofreading, and then they get cold readers to read it and all that kind of stuff. But pretty much what happens when we go through the structural edit is I add more stuff in. I've usually been a little bit too subtle, or I've assumed that something's obvious, and the editor will go, well, we kind of jump from here to here, and perhaps we need something to take the reader by the hand. So rather than rewriting what I've already got, the editing process tends to be just adding more stuff in. So a lot of the stuff that's in the book is the first draft. So I'm really lucky that my first drafts are so clean.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I mean, your chapters are tightly plotted and everything. It's just very well done, yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask, I mean, I could ask this in our conversation later on, but it also fits here. It's kind of a question about your books in general. It seems to me that you often write about secrets. What is it about secrets that gets to you?
I think the main driver for my stories tends to be the characters. I really like creating characters. And the most interesting thing I always think about people that I meet are the things that you don't see immediately, or the things that they don't choose to tell you. And they kind of drip that out as your relationship develops. And I think that's particularly true now when I've got lots of friends who are in their second career, and they don't always tell you what their first career was or what they did before the point that we're at currently. And so, you'll be chatting to somebody and they're just somebody's mum. And then suddenly that just somebody's mum turns out to have been a massive TV producer, or to have rowed a boat across the Atlantic, or they've all got all these really interesting parts to them. They don't talk about all the time because you don't talk about those kinds of things all the time. I find that really interesting. So when it comes to writing a novel, I think if I'm writing about families, which tends to be the things that I write about, then having a sort of an extension of that, a secret that's within the family that nobody knows about and that's been not necessarily covered up, but just not discussed. It's just endlessly fascinating. And who doesn't love a good mystery anyway? Who doesn't love to find out that somebody that you thought you knew really well has got this whole other side to them? There are 2 quite distinct themes to my books, and one is secrets and the other is escape. And there's quite a lot of people trying to escape from things in my books. I'm not sure what that says about me, but they're 2 things that I find really interesting.
Yeah, you've got the literal escape of Tiger, of course, and Impossible to Forget, which is an interesting narrative to follow. We'll get on to it. Shall we start with your reading? Do you want to?
Yes, let's do that.
Go for it.
Okay, well, the book opens with a letter. So that's the part I'm going to read. My dear friends, if you are reading this, then I must be dead. I've always wanted to say that. So very Agatha Christie. And please don't cry, Leon. It's only a bit of fun. Seriously, though, I want to thank you all for being there for me over the last couple of months. It's been tough, but having you lot in my corner has made it easier to cope. To be honest, I don't know what I'd have done without you. I couldn't have wished for a better bunch of mates. But there's just one last thing I need to ask you to do for me. Obviously, my biggest concern is my beautiful girl, Romany. I will never understand a universe that lets a parent die before they finish preparing their child to live. It's all kinds of wrong. Yet we are where we are. Without me, Romany will be left all alone. Even though she's about to turn 18, she's really still a child with so much to learn about the world, good and bad. She needs somebody to be there for her, a guardian, if you like, to guide her until she finds her feet. It won't be forever, just until she finishes her A-levels and gets a place at university, but I can't bear to think of her struggling through school on her own. I had to do that, and I don't want history repeating itself. That's where you come in. I charge you, my dearest and most trusted friends, with the vitally important task of steering her through the challenging months ahead. I know it wouldn't be fair to suggest that just one of you shoulders this massive responsibility, so I've decided to ask you all to play to your individual strengths. Maggie, as my most highly qualified and pragmatic friend, please would you help Romany with all things legal and formal and anything else that she should read before signing? I was never any good at that stuff, and I know you'll make a much better job of it. Leon, to you, I leave her cultural needs. Make sure she listens to all kinds of music and not just whatever crap's in the charts. She should read loads and write if the muse puts in an appearance. And I want her to be a regular at the theatre and the cinema, art galleries too. Basically, all the things that will lift her day-to-day life above the mundane and make her wonder. Tiger, I need you to keep her horizons wide. Make sure she travels when she can and absorbs different ways of life as easily as she absorbs sunlight. Help her to keep her eyes and her heart open. And finally, Hope. You may wonder what you're doing here. I know we've only known each other for a comparatively short amount of time, but I think I know you well enough to ask you to help. And something tells me that you would be the perfect candidate to keep an eye on Romany's relationships, friendships, and affairs of the heart. Please show her how to judge people accurately and fairly so that she can forgive the weaknesses of others. So even though my baby girl is setting forth on life's great adventure without her mum by her side, she will have you four, her guardian angels, to protect her. I know that she couldn't be in better hands. All my love forever, Angie.
Thank you. And you've got these four guardians, as we have heard, and three of them are friends. They all know each other. And then you've got Hope, who to them is random, and certainly to the reader, we're all like, who is she? And then we're finding out, we're taken back to the 1980s, York University, see where the friendships begin, etc. How important was the plot compared to the characters?
Well, the characters are obviously, as I mentioned, they're my favourite bit. And it was very important that the characters were vivid and that they played to their strengths, because obviously Angie chooses them each to have a particular role. So they needed to be able to demonstrate that they had those skills. So to that extent, the plot is led by the characters a little, because we need to have things that show that Leon is a musician and that Maggie is very straight-laced and that Tiger is never still for very long. So I needed to incorporate bits into the plot so that I could demonstrate that kind of stuff. I don't plot before I start. My books are very organic. So once I've got the concept of Angie appointing the four guardians, and then I had the ideas for the four guardians, then I just sort of cracked on to see where they take me. So the plot develops in that way. And so it's quite difficult to think about what the plot would have been, because I write in that organic way. To answer your question, I think the characters are the more important part to me.
So Hope and her storyline was in your mind from the beginning?
No, not at all. I think I had Hope as a character because I wanted her to have somebody that the others didn't know, because that felt as if that was going to be important. But I had no idea who Hope was going to be for quite a long time. And then I worked out how Hope would fit together about halfway through. Luckily, because she's not in the earlier parts of the book, I had quite a long time while I was writing the sort of 80s and 90s scenes to think about what Hope's role was going to be. So by the time I got to sort of the middle, when she becomes more important, I'd kind of worked out who she was going to be by that point.
Aha, okay, so that kind of answers my question. I'm thinking when you're talking about the plot and the characters, you know, I was wondering, did you know yourself who Hope was? And that's really interesting. So you've written the book working out Hope yourself as much as the reader does, as much as the characters do.
Yeah, and that is often how it works out. Sometimes I have ideas before I begin, but most of the time things like that will come to me. And the thing that I find the most fascinating about writing organically like that is that I will often have, without thinking about it, dropped little nuggets into the earlier chapters, which then turn out to be things that will be really useful later on. And that's just the subconscious. I'm sure that's just my subconscious mind. I don't think there's any particular magic in it, but it does feel like magic. In this case, for example, I'd start off with a character like Hope and nobody knows who she is and the others have no idea who she is or why she's there, and they're a bit disgruntled that they've been lifelong friends with Angie, and then suddenly there's this person who they don't even know there. And so, it was when it came to working out what Hope's role was going to be, it was then nice that I'd made her a bit sort of standoffish early on, and her character kind of fitted in with where she ended up going. And that was just a happy accident, really. I didn't really know that was how it was going to work out. It just did. No,
fantastic, fascinating as well. So we should go to the person who has written the letter, Angie. I mean, she's quite a character, right? It was obvious from the first moment. And I know I was really happy to see her included in the narrative. You've got Maggie's section and then you've got Angie. Can you tell us about Angie?
Yeah, Angie is great, isn't she? Angie is everything I'm not, really. She is a free spirit and she doesn't really care about the rules unless they suit her. And she hasn't really got any concept of property or, she's really quite selfish in her attitude. But at the same time, she's got a heart of gold. So she drives Maggie absolutely bonkers when they're at university because she uses all her stuff and takes her food out of the fridge. And she doesn't do it maliciously. She just doesn't cross her mind that the things aren't there for her to use. And I think partly because of the way that she's been brought up, pretty much looking after herself, really, she has this kind of very relaxed attitude to life in general. And the contrast between her and Maggie, who is a lot more like me, I just really, really enjoyed finding out who Angie was, just because she was just a breath of fresh air, really, in comparison to the Maggie character.
Mm-hmm. What you say about your difference to Angie, is this why she became your main person, your main character?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think as well, to do what she does, so to come up with this idea that she's going to have all of her friends looking after her 18-year-old child, she needs to have a different attitude to most people, because not many people come up with a whole gang of guardians for their kids. They adopt a guardian and it tends to be a relation or a very close friend or whatever, and they don't have this kind of arrangement. And so I thought that would be something that Angie specifically would do. And I think the fact that she has these friendships, but that she is so aware of the failings, for want of a better word, of her friends. She is the one, even though she's not there, she's the one who completely understands that her friends have all got things that they need to fix themselves. And so by picking these people to be the guardians, she is helping them to become better people, really, I suppose. And I think what really interests me about her is that even though she seems so sort of fly by night and so chaotic in her lifestyle, she's the one that's astute enough to realise that her friends all need fixing. Her friends haven't really worked that out for themselves. And so I just found her endlessly interesting to write.
I mean, she is amazing to read as a reader. And I love just the questions that you come up with as a reader about Angie. You just constantly answer them for us, which is lovely. But I should probably explain where that question came from. I noticed that you've been a lawyer. You sing in a choir.
Yes.
And of course, we've got Maggie, who's a lawyer. And we've got Leon, who is musical. How much of you is in this book and in the characters?
Maggie, yeah, Maggie is very much me at university. I was a rule follower and I was determined. I wanted to be a solicitor and I was there to get this done. And if somebody said that I wasn't allowed to do something, then I jolly well wouldn't do it. And I would get righteously indignant if somebody took my food out of the fridge and all that kind of stuff. The 18-year-old me was very much like Maggie. And then I think the others, things that I would like to be. I have always done musical things since I was a girl, but I didn't have that kind of talent that Leon has. And I would love to be a free spirit like Tiger, but I always have lived in the same place. I haven't really done the things. So I think part of the joy of being a writer and creating characters is you can put in them the things that you would love to do. And I think those two particularly, having the talent like Leon has or being a complete nomad like Tiger, are both things that would be lovely. If someone gave me 3 wishes, they're probably things I might have wished for. So that's why they're there, I think. I think that's just my subconscious saying, oh, that would be quite nice. You'll notice that there are no sporting people in these guardians. I don't do sport. I'm not interested in sport. So it never even crossed my mind to make a sporty guardian or to make Romany even vaguely interested. But other people would, have different dreams as their dream guardians. But for me, the travel and music and the arts and things, those are the things I'm interested in. So that was the kind of stuff that I wanted Romany to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course she's got the science going on and everything, so it's kind of an all-round education overall.
Yeah.
So moving to your writing style, the narrative, the narrative going forward in time, told in, I suppose you could say, batches, from different viewpoints. Why this style of narrative?
I think I often write, I always write, in fact, from different points of view. And partly that's because if you always write the whole story from one point of view, that character then has to be absolutely everywhere, because otherwise they haven't seen what happens, or you have somebody relating what's happened to them. So it's a trick, really, to be able to write from different points of view, because you can then tell the reader different angles, because they're different people and they see things differently. And also, from my point of view as a writer, it's just more interesting to write more characters. It's really good fun. I'll get up and whose turn is it today? Whose head am I in today? And I really enjoy that. I write from one character's point of view, and then I'll leave them alone and I'll move on to the next character. And it just gives me an opportunity to just think in a different way. I think all my books have got this kind of moving from one character point of view to another. And as far as the structure is concerned, because it was quite complicated, sometimes my books leap about in time, but I decided this one was probably easier to kind of start at the beginning. Obviously, we start at the current present day and then move back to the 1980s. But then after that, we move chronologically all the way through back to the present day again, rather than hopping in and out. And I thought, because we've got the various voices and all these things to hold on to, it just would make more sense to move through chronologically. So that's how I structured it.
Mm-hmm. When I was reading it, I loved how it was done, and I was trying to think of a time where I might have read something where a writer had chosen to do similar, and I hadn't. When I was reading it and you'd gone from Maggie to Angie, obviously you'd have Angie with the letter, as we heard, I thought, we're going to go to Leon and Tiger. And I kept expecting quite a lot of stuff from Leon's point of view, and yet then at the end I thought, it's kind of appropriate that there wasn't. Was Leon's exclusion as a kind of narrative voice due to his choices in life?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Possibly, yeah. He lives a very quiet life, and that's one of the things that Angie really wants to address as far as he's concerned, to embrace more of life, really. But also, I think I felt much closer to the female characters, and I think even though Leon doesn't get a voice of his own, you see plenty of him through the other characters' eyes and through his own dialogue and through his actions and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like I was giving Leon enough characterization, but without having to use his voice. So that's how I chose to do it.
Okay, yeah. I suppose I saw Becky there and thought, she's kind of literally keeping him away from the narrative almost.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. That's true, because he marries this woman who is exactly what he thinks he wants and isn't really. And she can't bear the idea that he's got all these people who he likes better and knows better than he seems to know her. And so she does that classic thing. You often see that the other way around, don't you, in a kind of gaslighting, the man keeping the woman away from her friends. And I just thought it was quite interesting to just kind of do it the other way around and have Becky keep Leon away from his friends so that she can completely control him.
Well, it is a spoiler, but obviously Leon and Maggie get together. Was that something that came to you also as you were writing?
Yeah. I didn't know that was going to happen until the scene when it happened. And that was one of the things that when we were editing, then I then had to go back and drop just a couple of hints earlier on, because it just literally came out of the blue, because it just literally occurred to me. And I think it hadn't occurred to them either that actually they might quite like each other until it hits them. And I think that does sometimes happen. You get to be very friendly with somebody, and then suddenly that friendship becomes something different and kind of takes you a bit by surprise.
It's amazing hearing about your editing process, because I think as a reader, you see the potential, the slight potential for Leon and Maggie at the start, I thought anyway. And so you saying, you've had to go back and add it in at the end, that's really, really fascinating to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think otherwise that is the downside of making it up as I go along, because sometimes, you make it up as you go along, then really to make a story satisfying to the reader, there do need to be hints. I mean, sometimes you do get a massive bombshell that you really didn't see coming, or a huge twist or something. But most of the time, the readers want to have a few signposts to show what's coming, because then it's quite nice when you guess that and you guess that correctly. But if I don't know that's what's going to happen when I start, I can't put those in. So I have to go back and put them in afterwards.
So I need to address Romany. Was it important that she was a narrator? Because I know she brings in kind of the third voice.
Yes. And I think it was important because it's her life, isn't it, that we're talking about? And she's got all these adults all trying to do their best for her. But really it is her life. But the thing that I wanted Romany to be able to demonstrate was that actually she's got her head screwed on properly, and it doesn't take her long to work out what her mum's up to, and it doesn't take her long to realise that Leon isn't going to do anything unless she pushes him into it. She's the one who finally gets Tiger to say, what his proper name is and all that kind of stuff. She's wise beyond her years, I think, and I liked the idea that you could have a young person who was actually wiser than the adults who were supposed to be looking after her. And in order to do that, I felt like I had to give her a voice so that it was apparent to the reader that she's wiser than the adults.
She's kind of their guardian, very much. You've got this both sides going on, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get to.
I've got one more question about Romany. I probably should have asked it before, but it's kind of towards the end more. Where would Romany be without the friends? How would her year have gone?
I'm sure because she's so capable, she would have cracked on and she would have had the support of her own friends, and she would have maybe got her A-levels and been able to go to university. But I'm not sure that she would have been as whole as she is by the time she goes to university, because it's such a traumatic thing to lose a parent at any age, but particularly when you're young and at such an important stage in your education. And I think it would all have just have been extraordinarily overwhelming. And the fact that she had all these people in her corner, she could talk to them, and they knew her mum so well that meant that she would be able to talk about Angie with people who understood where she was coming from. And I think perhaps she wouldn't have had that if she'd just been brought up by, I don't know, some relation that I haven't written. So I think it just helps with her grieving process. And the fact that she is then able to help fix these adults as well gives her something else to think about. She can't wallow in self-pity because she's got all these people who are really not that got that together themselves. So I think that probably helps her to deal with her grief. And then obviously by the end of the year, she's in the position where she's got this exciting new life. She gets her grades, she can go to Durham, she can go to university and start again. And it's not perfect, but then, she knows where she'll be in the holidays, and you never get over losing a parent. And I'm not suggesting for one second that it's all a happy ending and all that kind of stuff. But I do think she was probably in a stronger position than she would have been without them.
Mm-hmm. A different question completely. Just one on Tiger. Has Tiger found himself at last by the end of the book?
Yeah, I think so. I think Tiger has been running for quite a long time. And to start with, it's great, isn't it, when you're sort of in your late teenage or in your 20s or whatever, to live this fantastic lifestyle where you just go where the wind blows, and you can go and experience all these different things, and he earns a bit of money here and there, and then he goes to somewhere else and he meets somebody and they say, come to here, and he can do, and all that kind of stuff. But you can't do that forever. Of course you could do that forever, but comes a time in life where you kind of want to settle. And I think he started to become frightened that actually he had no money, so he couldn't stop because he had no way of earning any money and no way of, couldn't buy himself a house or anything because he hadn't got any money, he hadn't got a job, and he hadn't got any experience, he hasn't got any education. But of course he has masses of experience and huge amounts of education from what he's learned while he's been traveling, but they don't necessarily immediately translate themselves into a job. And so I think what Angie sees is that he's ready to stop, but he isn't brave enough to see that himself, and he has to kind of have that pointed out to him. And because Angie makes him stop and sort of guilt trips him into stopping, then I think he then discovers all these domestic skills that he didn't know he had, and he learns that actually staying in one place is not quite as dreadful and awful as he thought it was. So I think he's always known himself, but I think by the time we get to the end of the book, he has learned that actually he can stop, and it's not a failing. It doesn't mean that he's failed. It just means that he's reached a different stage in his life.
I thought it was poignant. Obviously, it's your decision as an author, but I thought it was poignant that no one really talks about what his name is or anything like that, and you're just given Tiger until Romany asks. And it's, at the end when he's found himself and stuff. Yeah, it was just really nice how that happened.
Yeah, because I think he's just honest, isn't he? All of a sudden, he's just honest.
Yes. Obviously, you've spoken about how you learned a lot as you carried on writing. So I know that this question is now kind of in the context of that as well. But maybe taking an editing, anything like that. How early on did you want people to kind of get the twist with Hope?
But I suppose in an ideal world, you kind of don't want to get the twist until you read it. So it's nice if people don't guess things. But in order to make a story believable, you can't just put, like we were discussing before, you can't entirely pull it out of the air because it doesn't ring true, really. So, obviously, I think if an author writes a twist, they want people to guess it, on the page as they're reading it. Oh, my goodness, I didn't see that coming. But realistically, I think that doesn't often happen. And also, if you set out to do that, you then have this awful thing where you're trying to guess what the twist is. And that takes away from what you're doing, because if they're constantly going, it must be that, or it must be that, or it must be that, then I think that detracts from the actual joy of reading the story. So really, I don't really mind where people guess what is going to happen, as long as the story is then unravelled in a way that is satisfying to them, even if they have guessed. And obviously it's satisfying if they haven't. So I didn't know. So, I think Stephen King says, he doesn't plot his novels either, because if he hasn't worked out what's going to happen, his readers can't guess. And I'm not Stephen King, and I don't think that's true of mine. I think you can guess. But I think there is a joy in not really knowing where something's going when you're writing it, because it just makes it much more interesting to write. And I hope then it makes it interesting to read also.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason that I thought of the question was because it did take me until a couple of chapters before you say for me to get it. And I know at the time I was like, oh my goodness, I feel really kind of embarrassed, that it took me so long.
I'm glad you didn't get it till
Yeah, no, I'm starting to feel less embarrassed now hearing you saying that, yeah.
Yeah, because, because I think it depends, doesn't it? I'm one of those people that, I watch a film with my husband and he'll go, oh my God, it's them. And I'm thinking, what? And he picks up all those things and he looks at who the people are and which of them could be the murderer or whatever it is. And that's how he likes to work. And then he is pleased with himself because he's worked out who it is. And then that's fine. And he'll then watch the rest of it in full knowledge that he knows who it is. Well, I don't watch them like that. I'm much more interested in having things unfolded. I follow with the characters and I want to know at the same speed as the characters discover. And if that means that I close my mind off to something that's really obvious, then I quite like to do that, because I just like to be led, and I like to be led through books, and I like to be led through films. And so that's how I try to write as well.
Interesting to hear that. I think we've kind of managed to avoid quite a few spoilers, or the main spoilers. So if we leave that bit there, I believe it's called An Unwanted Inheritance. Can you tell us about your next book?
Yeah. So basically, one of the characters very early on in the book finds a suitcase under a bed with an awful lot of money in it. And the essence of the book is, what are they going to do with it? And there are 3 siblings and their other halves, and they all have different ideas about how to use this money. And as the story goes on, we understand why they all have different ideas. And even within couples, the couples don't all agree. So it turns into a massive argument as to how they're going to deal with this huge amounts of cash. And you watch as all their different things, their lives unravel as a result of not being able to decide what to do with this money. And I think really, when it comes down to it, it's a story about integrity. And I was writing it, I wrote Impossible to Forget in lockdown, but then lockdown went on for such a long time. So then I moved on to a second book. And I don't know if you remember, but once we were all slightly less frightened about what was going to happen with COVID and everything, and then people started to interpret the rules in a different way, and different parts of the country had different rules. And where I live in Bradford, we were quite heavily locally locked down for really quite a long time. And so people were getting quite cross, and some people would interpret local as meaning they could get in their car and drive 20 miles and that was local, whereas other people thought you could travel locally, which meant you could walk there. And it was all these kinds of things. And it was just really interesting how people's integrity and the rules all came together. And I was writing this story about this discovery of this huge amount of cash, and realised actually what I was writing was a book about integrity. And it's about how what you do, whether you do the right thing or whether you do what's right for you or right for your family or morally right or legally right. And so really that's what the book's all about.
So obviously you've just published Impossible to Forget. What kind of date are we looking at for this new book?
I think it's due out in December. So that'll be sort of the tail end of 2022.
And is there a sort of mystery element to this? Do we find out why the money was left or anything like that? Are we allowed to know that?
Yeah, we do find out. And again, I had no idea when I was writing it. I got actually really quite close to the end before I worked out where the money had come from. There were a few scary moments with that because I was thinking, well, I'm quite a long way into this book and I still have no idea why this money is in the suitcase under this bed. And then suddenly I had an idea and I thought, of course, that's exactly why it's there. You foolish woman, why did you not realise that before? So yes, we do find out what the money is all about by the time we get to the end.
Fantastic. In terms of what we've talked about or anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to mention, is there anything else you'd like to say at the end of this podcast?
Oh, goodness. I think it's really interesting as a writer to look at story and try and work out what it is that is important in a story. And when I'm writing mine, the scheme is quite small. It's usually a family, there's usually something going on and some sort of, as you say, some sort of secret, but they're quite small worlds. They're ordinary people with these secrets. And I think the thing that I find the most fascinating about writing these stories that are quite small in this way is that people are endlessly fascinating. And it doesn't matter how domestic a setting or how it feels like, a character has this life that they think is just really a bit dull, because we're all so really, really interesting. Everybody has interesting things about them, even if they think that they are just not interesting at all. And that's the joy, I think, of writing the books that I write, because I'm able to dig into all these people and find the essence of them and work out what it is that makes them tick and what it is that give them their place within their own world and within the greater world. And I just love doing that. So I hope that that's something that comes across in my books, that, you don't need a huge canvas or a massive invented world or whatever, because every single person has stories in them. And it's my joy to extract those stories.
Well, maybe, not a canvas, but I think you need lots and lots of paper, because the possibilities for stories are endless.
Absolutely. And every situation, I'm constantly asking, well, that's happened. Well, what if this happened? What if it happened like that? What if, what would happen if, that person did, instead of doing this? What if, and, there are just so many, it's endless, infinite amount of possibilities, which is what makes it so much fun.
Well, something I noticed, I haven't read your first book, but you've got a sequel to that book. Do you think there are possibilities in the future to write companion novels or sequels to your other books?
Yeah, possibly. And people ask me quite often, there's particularly in the last piece, there's a family that in that book called the Nightingales, and there were three sisters who I particularly really liked writing. And people often ask me where they are and what might have happened to them. I think I try to always be coming up with new ideas and new scenarios. And because I don't write in series, they are all standalone novels. But it is always tempting to think about where people might have got to. And usually when I get to the end of a novel, I haven't thought any further than that. I have no idea what's going to happen to them. So when I wrote Postcards at Christmas, it was fun. But to think about where those characters might have got to after the novel closed and time went on. So I'm not sure I will ever do any more, but it would be a fun exercise to think about where all these characters are now.
Mm-hmm. Imogen, this has been absolutely lovely having you here today and talking about Impossible to Forget and mentioning your other books as well. I mean, I'm going to go back and read some of your other work that I haven't looked at so much. Congratulations on the book. It's, like I said, it's gone straight to the bestsellers. Pre-orders must have been amazing. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. It's been such good fun.
Links to purchase Impossible to Forget are in the episode description. If you have enjoyed today's discussion, do subscribe or follow the podcast on your listening app of choice. And please do review the podcast if you can. Reviews are incredibly valuable, both in getting the word out there and also in terms of feedback. And reviews can be left on Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict and the Podchaser website. The Wormhole Podcast, episode 56, was recorded on the 2nd of February and published on the 14th of March 2022. Music and production by Charlie Place.